Welcome back to the show. My name is Azfar Rizvi. Today is Wednesday the 12th. Most people watched this interview and moved on. We're going to sit with this because I feel like Peter Beinart is saying things that have implications that go far beyond this one conversation.
They would rather have an authoritarian American political system that supports Israel than a democratic political system that doesn't support Israel.
God, that seems dangerous.
That might seem like an inflammatory thing to say, but just look at what they do. Look at the candidates they support. Their criteria is, do you support Israel, not do you support free elections in the United States?
The interview that we're going to watch is hosted by Mary Harris, and she's the host of Slate's daily news podcast, What's Next? She is, in my opinion, one of the sharpest daily news voices in American news today. And the conversation she's having with Peter Beinart is exactly why we are here today. I was particularly interested in this conversation because it was posted a few days ago, and it still has, I think, just 13,000 views. This was posted on August the 4th. And I really believe that both of these are having an incredibly thoughtful conversation, something that I feel like we don't see enough often in mainstream media. Now, our guest is Peter Beinart, a Jewish American writer, scholar, and editor who spent years inside the liberal Zionist mainstream and then quietly, methodically walked out of it. Not because he stopped caring about Jewish identity, but because he started taking it more seriously. He is now one of the most consequential voices in American political thought, and the people with the most money are working very hard to make sure you never hear from him. I have followed his work for a very long time, and I really feel like he's one of those thought leaders who is not just committed to the conversation, but also is very mindful and thoughtful of the conversation he has with mainstream.
So I'm curious, Peter, did you watch any of the debate earlier this month between Michigan's two Democratic Senate candidates, Abdul El-Sayed and Haley Stevens?
I saw little clips, yeah.
What stood out to you about this debate?
I think Abdul Sayed is doing something that is going to be a model for a lot of national Democrats. And I think the media hasn't quite understood the significance of what he's doing in two ways. First of all, he's being described as this kind of ultra-lefty progressive candidate. But what he's saying has a tremendous amount of crossover appeal. In fact, I think he's almost found a way of making America first a progressive narrative, because what he keeps on saying is, why are we spending this money to kill Palestinians when we should be spending it here in Michigan, right? That is a way of framing the whole America first and the Gaza thing. It brings them together, right? And I think it's actually something that the vast majority of Republicans agree with. And so it's, instead of saying America first means, we're not going to give any money for USAID to help people in need. It's saying we're not going to use our money to kill people. We're going to invest in Americans. The second thing he's doing is he's found a way to make his financial disadvantage a strength by making the money that AIPAC is giving to Haley Stevens, his opponent, so toxic that, ironically, her huge financial advantage, which is being bankrolled by AIPAC and other pro-Israel and other kind of anti-progressive groups, actually becomes an albatross for her. In an environment like this one, where Republicans are likely to have a big financial advantage because Trump's pay-to-play authoritarianism means that the ultra-rich are likely to give money to Donald Trump because they want favors from Donald Trump, turning this around and making that money toxic. It doesn't have to be AIPAC. It could be other kind of financial interests. It could be Elon Musk. I actually think is an important kind of is a kind of model for Democrats across the country.
I feel like one thing that we're slowly understanding now as a country that is going into elections slowly and gradually, we're going to head towards the midterms, and then we're going to head towards the 2020 elections. And what we all have started to understand is mainstream media will never want Republicans and Democrats on the same page, which is why they are doing their best to minimize the commonality between what some of the more progressive Democrats want and what some of the Republicans want, which is what Peter mentioned here. It's not really surprising because the mainstream media, in fact, a lot of the media is bankrolled, sponsored, supported by pro-MAGA, MAGA pro-Trump billionaires, the crypto bros and billionaires, the pharma billionaires. And so it's not really difficult for us to understand and see that anymore. But in the past, it was difficult. Now this is a mask-off moment for media, and you can see that every day.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching some of this debate this morning, and it stood out to me that if you did a drinking game where you drank every time someone said AIPAC, you would not be well by the end of this debate. AIPAC came up again and again. But that said, there was only one person who really wanted to say AIPAC again and again, and it was Abdul El-Sayed. Haley Stevens, she almost never used the word.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
Right. This is part of why AIPAC is kind of collapsing politically. Powerful, effective lobbies don't make the news. They work quietly behind the scenes at fundraisers that no one knows about, that people don't talk about. And
the first rule of AIPAC is nobody talks about AIPAC.
Yes, and that's true. I mean, that's and that's true for that's true for big pharma. It's true for the energy. It's true in general. And AIPAC worked that way for many, many years. They raised money, but as an organization, they tried to keep a low profile. What happened was when the squad won, AIPAC shifted its strategy. It created a super PAC so it could raise more money, but it also became much more rhetorically and publicly aggressive. And it had some early successes, defeating Jamal Bowman, defeating Cori Bush. But now we're seeing, in the wake of what's now widely understood as a genocide in Gaza, with public opinion having shifted so much, that AIPAC's role in the spotlight is actually turning into a political disaster for them. And you notice that AIPAC's ads are not about Israel, because AIPAC kind of knows that it's not going to win the Israel debate inside the Democratic Party. And this is the problem that Haley Stevens has, right? She has kind of locked herself in with those folks, but there isn't a good argument that she has to refute what Abdul Sayed is saying, that the money we shouldn't be spending our money. Really what the United States does is it basically gives Israel a credit card to buy money from U.S. defense contractors. So really what he's saying is we shouldn't be giving Israel money to fatten the pockets of defense contractors. We should spend that money in Michigan on the needs of people in Michigan. She doesn't have a good answer to that.
A couple of things to keep in mind is that because this was recorded before the primaries, we have seen how AIPAC has now come out and very clearly expressed its support for the pro-Israeli politicians and candidates. It's also interesting that their only criteria is that a candidate has to be pro-Israel, which essentially just means that AIPAC doesn't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican, which also means, by extension, that they will end up supporting election deniers, for instance. They do not care which side of the aisle the politician is coming from, as long as the politician just supports Israel unconditionally. To Haley Stevens' credit, she immediately threw her support behind Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, and she has come out and given a few interviews where she's acknowledged that she is a Zionist Democrat. And I really appreciate her stance because she's super honest about it. During the campaign, we did see a few videos where her constituents were asking her questions about funding, specifically about AIPAC, and she just ended up walking away from them, which really impacted her campaign as well. So I feel like we're in a good place now after the midterms, because now things are more clear, and we've seen how aggressively anti-Arab and anti-Muslim the onslaught has been against Abdul. So it will only just continue to increase. And I wish I could have said it's going to get better, but it's not. It's just going to keep getting worse.
Yeah. We should back up and introduce AIPAC. I mean, AIPAC is, of course, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It was founded back in the 50s, or its progenitor was back in the 50s, the American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs. And I feel like it's worth noting that from the beginning, there were concerns about this kind of organization. Like the Eisenhower administration was concerned that this was the Israeli government essentially getting involved in American politics, right?
I've always seen AIPAC as not just a powerful lobby, but also a supporter of social justice and human rights movements in the US. And it has, I believe, led the conversation around, say, women's rights, around Black Lives Matter, around gender identity, pride. So this transition from the early 60s and 70s into what AIPAC is conducting across the board is kind of surprising, but also it's opening up for all of us to see.
Yes. I mean, the thing about AIPAC is, on the one hand, it is a very American organization, right? If you know the American Jewish community, you know that there's a group of American Jews in every major Jewish community in America that basically goes to three kind of dinners a year. They go to their synagogue dinner, they go to the dinner for the Federation, which is kind of gives out the philanthropy in the Jewish community, like supports the hospitals and the Jewish schools and old age homes, and then they go to the AIPAC dinner. It's kind of part of their secular religion of what it means to be Jewish. Now, I might argue they'd be better off going to synagogue more and doing some of that stuff less.
Oh boy, don't even get me started. I've had dozens of conversations with Muslim business leaders, academics, professionals, technology professionals, and I've asked them to engage the Jewish community and the broader political landscape. But all they seem to be concerned about is the mosque and being insular. And it's been very frustrating. And this is not the video for me to talk about that. But I'm glad that he also experienced, or at least mentioned that he's experienced that, because I can absolutely understand the vibe that he got from them.
But this is what it has meant for a whole generation of people. So it is a very American thing. And AIPAC has had a lot of power because these donors, these activists across the country have developed relationships with American politicians. On the other hand, it is also absolutely the case that AIPAC will not cross the Israeli government. It will actually shift it tries to do it subtly, but it actually shifts the policy positions that it supports based on what the Israeli government is doing. So while it's not right to say that AIPAC is an Israeli organization, it is correct to say that it is an organization that is willing to challenge the American government. You know, it challenged Barack Obama's Iran nuclear deal very forcibly, but it will not challenge the Israeli government. And that, I think, is part of the reason that the way it's such a problematic actor in American politics.
I feel like the layering of this has changed because after Dr. Abdul al-Sayed's win, AIPAC had a very extensive press release where it congratulated all the pro-Israel politicians who had won, and it declared in that press release that their only concern is supporting politicians who are pro-Israel, which again goes back to my earlier point that they don't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat as long as you are pro-Israel, which I feel like is such a detrimental step for the American democracy right now.
Yeah. And AIPAC's Super PAC, the United Democracy Project, they've spent $30 million in Michigan, which is more than double its next highest spend ever, according to Politico. It's just a lot of money, mostly advertising, right?
I think the final dollar count that we got was somewhere around $70 million. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me right now.
Right. And can we just pause on the name here for a second? United Democracy Project. First of all, of course, you would never know that it has anything to do with Israel. Right.
Yeah.
So it just shows how it doesn't think it can win that debate. But it's also, the name is such a lie. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think so, to me, appalling, because in reality, what a part of what I think makes AIPAC so problematic is that it only evaluates candidates based on how much they are willing to support Israel.
Right. Like, it doesn't matter if they are an election denier. It doesn't matter any of that stuff. It's the democracy part actually doesn't matter that much. It's just the Israel part.
Right. Exactly. For them to use the word democracy when they are absolutely willing to choose election deniers, people who want to prevent America from having a free election in 2026, 2028, as long as those folks support Israel. Actually, what AIPAC is actually doing represents, I think, a kind of betrayal of the obligation that American Jews, like all Americans, should feel to fight for democracy. And there was a time when American Jewish organizations made the expansion of American democracy their central political goal. Whereas you see for AIPAC now, it's basically irrelevant. They would rather have an authoritarian American political system that supports Israel than a democratic political system that doesn't support Israel.
God, that seems dangerous.
That might seem like an inflammatory thing to say, but just look at what they do. Look at the candidates they support. Their criteria is, do you support Israel? Not, do you support free elections in the United States?
You know, Michigan is going to the polls this week, but so is Missouri. And that's another state where AIPAC is a key player. You've got former Representative Cori Bush, who's trying to mount a comeback campaign. She lost her seat to Wesley Bell. She blames AIPAC for getting her kicked out of Congress in 2024. Are you watching Michigan and Missouri as like part of a piece?
Absolutely. I mean, Michigan is getting more attention because it's a Senate race and because Abdul Sayed will, if he wins that primary in the election, will become a very, very prominent, important person in American politics, partly because we've had so few prominent Arab and Muslim politicians in the United States. This really represents, given the climate of intense Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism that has dominated American public life, especially since 9/11. I think that will be a real breakthrough. But yeah, the Cori Bush race is also really important. She's one of the most left-wing members of Congress. She was the person who co-sponsored with, I think, Rashida Tlaib, a call for a ceasefire just weeks, I think, after October 7th. And so for her to come back into Congress, especially with this new crop of people who are being elected, the DSA candidates in New York, the Chris Rabb in Philadelphia, there is I think, it will be a sign that the Democratic Party is really in Congress, really starting to catch up to Democratic public opinion on this issue.
I guess we should say if she comes back, we won't know the results until Wednesday.
Yes. And she's been clearly outspent, and so we don't know what'll happen in the race, but we do know that the momentum is clearly pushing in one direction, and the pace of the transformation in the Democratic Party on this issue is really extraordinary. I mean, I can't think of another issue in my adult lifetime except for gay marriage where the politics of an issue have shifted so radically, so quickly.
So I want to reset us a little bit. As a Jewish writer who's covered politics, you've written about AIPAC for a really long time. In fact, at some point, you were a paid speaker with AIPAC.
Yes, much earlier in my life. That's true. That's true. It's part of why I know the ecosystem so well.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that tells me a lot about how much AIPAC itself has changed, because I just simply can't imagine you doing that now. Can you just take me on your journey a little bit from when I won't say you were all in on AIPAC, but you were certainly aligned with their interests, and then you are not now.
This is going to be
fun. I mean, AIPAC has changed a bit, but I would say more it's my own change. I mean, I grew up in a family that was kind of liberal Zionist, not right-wing Zionist, but in which the importance of the state of Israel and America supporting the state of Israel was really unquestioned. It was central to my political identity, my Jewish identity. And so I didn't necessarily agree with AIPAC on everything, but I felt that, it was important for the U.S. to support Israel. And it was also at a time when you had Israeli prime ministers like Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert, who I thought at that time, were open to the idea of creating a Palestinian state. I didn't necessarily think that, and so I thought that one could support a Palestinian state, support Israel, and that AIPAC wouldn't necessarily be an obstacle to that, that AIPAC could be part of that. I think that turned out to be profoundly wrong. And really what set me on a different course was, about 25 years ago or now, for the first time going to the West Bank and spending time with Palestinians. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say that it took me until my early 30s to go and spend time with Palestinians in the West Bank, even though I've been going to Israel since I was a kid, and I thought I knew Israel pretty well. But the first day I spent in the West Bank, I realized I don't actually know almost anything about what it means to be a Palestinian under Israeli control. And I know very little. And I've also I didn't have any idea how brutal the control of Palestinians, this fundamentally undemocratic control, how brutal it is, even though I should have known. And secondly, I realized that I had been carrying around a lot of dehumanizing and I would say racist attitudes towards Palestinians. I wouldn't have thought of myself that way. I thought of myself as kind of a liberal. I wanted a Palestinian state, but I had grown up in an environment, and this is part of what AIPAC and other Jewish organizations do. They create this discourse in Jewish communities from your earliest moments where you talk about Palestinians, but you don't listen to Palestinians. And you talk about them as this kind of faceless, dangerous mass of people who, for some reason, always want to threaten Jews.
So you talk about Palestinians, but not necessarily with them.
Yes, and you don't listen. If you go to Jewish day schools or Jewish camps or Jewish community centers or Jewish youth movements, you're never given a book by a Palestinian to read or a movie by a Palestinian or have a Palestinian speaker. You're always talking about people, but you're not listening to them. It's a recipe for dehumanization. And I was part of that. I imbibed that. And so it was that experience and coming back from that made me realize I had to rethink some things very, very fundamentally. And it meant that I began to see AIPAC not as an organization that I could have a relationship with, but as an organization that was in fundamental conflict with the principles that I came to understand, which was that American Jewish and American support for Israel was a moral abomination because our money and our community were complicit in supporting Israel in a system of very, very profound oppression. And that oppression has only deepened in the 25 years or so since I began to come to some of those understandings.
I also do not blame him for taking so long to kind of unpack this, because mainstream media here has almost always eliminated any chances of a discourse where you could have thoughtful Palestinian perspectives as well. And we've seen that happen in the past 2-3 years as well, in perhaps a more open, brazen manner than many of us had even anticipated or suspected in the past as well. There are a few very interesting documentaries online that show you like a bird's eye view of how AIPAC works, or perhaps how the whole understanding of Israel is for Israeli citizens and a lot of the Zionist Americans who are there. And one documentary that comes to mind is called Israelism. It's an incredible documentary. And when I saw it, it really opened my eyes as well about how ill-informed I was also, despite understanding that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict goes back decades ago. I knew that part, but I had always struggled with understanding why people do not see that. And when I saw that documentary, I realized that there is a very concerted effort to erase some of the conversation. So I'll try, and if I remember, I will put a link to that documentary in the description as well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have been on a similar journey to you, because I feel like the word AIPAC has become kind of a buzzword in liberal circles, implying both that you're in the pocket of corporate lobbyists, which is a critique that a lot of people on both sides of the aisle like to make, but then also that you're in the pocket of Israel specifically. Is it worth just laying out, you've laid out how powerful AIPAC is in the Jewish community. Is it worth laying out too how powerful AIPAC is in Washington and how they use that power?
See, this is why I really enjoyed how Mary and Peter were having this conversation, because this is not your run-of-the-mill AIPAC is evil, Israel is evil, Palestinians are evil, blah, blah, blah conversation. This is a thoughtful conversation between two people who I sense are genuinely interested in each other's perspective. And Peter is perhaps one of the foremost thought leader around this. So I'm really happy that I encountered this video.
Sure. AIPAC is powerful in Washington in part because there hasn't really been much on the other side, right? So
like there's no Palestinian version of AIPAC.
Exactly. For a variety of reasons, Palestinians and also Arabs and Muslims more generally have not.
There is a Palestinian PAC now, or pro-Palestinian PAC now, and I believe it started earlier in the year, 2026. February, if I recall properly. I don't have the exact details, but it came up during a couple of conversations on CNN, and I'll try and get more information about that for you as well.
Not had the kind of organizations that develop the deep relationships with politicians, relationships lubricated by money that AIPAC has. That's partly because American Jews have just been in the United States for quite a long time, right? And so you have a community, immigrant communities in general are less comfortable playing this kind of political game. But you're talking now in the American Jewish community, second, third, fourth generation American Jews who, in fact, one of the key ways of understanding AIPAC actually is this sense of guilt that has existed inside the American Jewish community, that the American Jewish community was not politically organized to do more during the Holocaust. And so wasn't really able to pressure Franklin Roosevelt, willing or able to pressure Franklin Roosevelt in the 1940s. But you have later generations of American Jews, the children, even grandchildren of those people in the 1940s, who are much more comfortable working in the American political system. And one of the messages that AIPAC sends is this idea that you are going to use your power, your influence as American Jews to save Jews in Israel from another Holocaust. That's always been at the kind of center, the kind of emotional core of what AIPAC says to American Jews. In terms of politics, AIPAC is powerful because, again, it's not just that many Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim Americans have come to the United States more recently. It's also that we have a climate of such profound anti-Palestinian racism and so much anti-Arab racism and so much Islamophobia that it's been very difficult for Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims who might have an interest in the Palestinian cause to be able to organize and to be able to develop the relationship with politicians that might actually give them a different perspective and then might fund their candidacy.
Can we is there someone who's done the math of here is how funding from AIPAC actually then goes on to influence someone's behavior in Washington, their votes, things like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think you can see a pretty clear relationship between candidates who get money from AIPAC and the votes. And the money, in a way, it's a little more subtle than the money. It's also the relationships that the money helps people build. AIPAC's power, I think, has never rested primarily on its staff in Washington. AIPAC, in some ways, is a matchmaking organization. That's what it has done. If you're starting to run for low-level office, even state senate, let's say, or state representative, and what do you immediately need? Because we have a corrupt political system in which money, that's the primary fundamental thing. The first thing you have to understand why AIPAC is powerful, or to understand why Big Pharma is powerful, or the oil industries, any of this, crypto, is because of the role that money plays in politics. So you want to run for office, great. The first thing that the party comes and tells you is you have to raise tons and tons of money very fast. Where are you going to go? So then, AIPAC will come along and say, there's this really nice person. If possible, they try to find someone who lives locally. And this person will get to know you, talk to you about the U.S.-Israel relationship, and they'll throw a fundraiser for you. Mm-hmm. And so it develops a relationship early in politicians' careers. And then you run for Congress and they hold fundraisers for you there. And then they take you on an AIPAC-sponsored trip to Israel. You get to know the people and you develop a friendship with those people. And then you're running for Senate and they're holding more fundraisers for you. And it's been going on for years or even decades.
It's easy for me to see, listening to you, how difficult it would be for someone who's done that for years to decouple themselves from that relationship.
Right. Especially because it's not really like you have other people until quite recently necessarily speaking in your ear on the other side. So you think
or to fill the void, like money and relationship wise.
Yeah. So oftentimes, honestly, like I think a lot of politicians think of AIPAC not as AIPAC, but like my friend Dave, right? He's been supporting me for 25 years. I went to Israel with him. He went to my kids' thing. I went to his kids' thing. He's a nice guy. He's a Jewish guy. He's told me the story of his family. He really cares about Israel. And so why not? Israel's not my big issue anyway. I'm coming from Wisconsin because I want to deal with, particular local issues, healthcare. But sure, Dave supports this and he's a great guy and I see the world through his eyes. It's only recently, I think, that the Palestine solidarity movement has developed enough power, and especially because of the genocide in Gaza, that this issue has become so central to politicians that guy who's been talking to Dave about this issue for decades now, and Dave has been supporting him, and Dave's friends have been supporting him, that now he's going to town hall meetings or he's going to the grocery store and he's having some person come up to him. The person might have a personal connection. They might be Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, but oftentimes they're not. They're just an American who says like, hey, Mr. Congressman, like, what the heck, right? Like, I'm seeing kids being killed. Why are you supporting this? And only now, and it's so horrifying that it's taken this genocide to get us there. This is making politicians, including politicians who have very long relationships with AIPAC, start to say, I'm sorry, but I'm actually going to get off the bus.
Well, it's so interesting to me that you say, that AIPAC was born out of this Jewish guilt around not being able to stop the Holocaust, because of course we're seeing this rise in anti-AIPAC discourse at the same time that we're seeing the genocide in Gaza.
Right.
And we're also seeing the rise of Abdul El-Sayed as a candidate in Michigan who is Muslim. And
yes.
Of course, Michigan is, it's the home of Dearborn, which is right. It has been the only majority Muslim city in the United States. I'm assuming it still is. And so these things kind of make sense of a piece together when you say it like that.
Right. I mean, look, part of what we're seeing with Zohar Mamdani and Abdul Sayed and others is a natural and I would say healthy story in which newer communities that might be more immigrant heavy are starting to play their role in American politics and have a voice. And frankly, I think this would have happened faster for Arab and Muslim politicians, if not for the profound Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism that we've been dealing with in the United States, and is still completely hegemonic in the Republican Party. But it requires, I think, American Jews to think about the question of anti-Semitism and our safety in a fundamentally different way than these groups like AIPAC want us to think. They want to think in zero-sum terms, right? That if you have the rise of candidates like Abdul Sayed who don't want America to support Israel, who don't want America to give weapons to Israel, then that threatens American Jews because the safety of American Jews equals support for Israel. I think that's nonsense, actually.
Well, it's a redefinition of safety. It's a redefinition of safety. It's saying the safety is not a separate place where you are on your own and no one can touch you.
Yes.
Safety is found in community with other people, working through your differences, etc.
100%. An American Jewish.
I feel like this is why I love this conversation, because Mary's not just asking these questions as a gotcha. She is genuinely curious about. It's very clear that she's curious and conscious about Jewish safety. And this question of what safe means and how it kind of interacts with and aligns with and coincides with and interfaces with community is such an important piece. And I would imagine it's not just the word safety here is not just from a Jewish perspective. As a Muslim, I imagine that what safety means for Muslims and what safety means for the Jewish people, or for Christian people, or for people from any faith or non-denominational people as well. I feel like the term safety and what safety means all aligns together. And I think that AIPAC has kind of diluted that sense because of its very pro-Israel stance. And I feel like Peter has always been clear about what safety means for the Jewish people, which is why I'm certain that AIPAC has never invited him again back as a keynote speaker or a writer.
Organizations used to understand this in the 50s and 60s, the 40s, the 50s and 60s. The American Jewish organizations invested heavily in the civil rights movement, You know, the funding for the Kenneth and Mamie Clark's a famous doll study that was cited in the Brown versus Board of Education, which showed the profound psychological harm to young black kids of
They preferred
segregation.
white dolls over black dolls, even when they were black.
That was funded in part by the American Jewish Committee. The March on Washington was partly organized by the General Council of the American Jewish Congress. The speaker who preceded Martin Luther King that day was a rabbi from who was a rabbi from Nazi Berlin, Joachim Prinz, who was the head of the American Jewish Congress. These Jewish organizations supported civil rights because they saw we are a group that has suffered terrible discrimination.
Yes.
Black people are the group that are suffering racism par excellence in the United States. If they succeed in moving towards equal citizenship, we also will be safer because America will be a country that is less racist and less authoritarian. That was a very wise logic, but it is a logic that groups like AIPAC have basically turned against.
And I don't want to keep interrupting the conversation, but even I have, in my previous life as a journalist and as a professor, worked with several Jewish friends and colleagues and allies who have educated me about how to approach academia from a social justice lens, because they saw how challenged the Muslim community was within the US political system. So I owe a lot of my learning and success to a lot of my Jewish seniors and colleagues and friends.
But I do think that AIPAC has kind of become a meme or a shorthand too.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where things get messy and may even feel dangerous.
I think that one needs to be careful in a couple of ways. I think it's first and always important to say that when one's opposition to the corruption in American politics that's illustrated by AIPAC is not a singular thing. It's part of the broader corruption, right? That also exists with big pharma, with big energy, with crypto, now with AI, within a whole range of areas, right? So not to exceptionalize this. If the only special interest whose money you're concerned about is AIPAC, then I am a little bit worried about you, right?
But I feel like it is the one that people are saying the loudest.
It is the one that people are saying the loudest now. That's true. And I think it has a lot to do with what we've just witnessed in Gaza. But I think if you listen to someone like Zohran Mamdani, or you listen to someone like Abdul El-Sayed, or a lot of these progressives, you will also hear them talking about. In fact, I think El-Sayed has also been attacking now Haley Stevens for receiving money from other kind of corporate interests that he believes have an agenda that's hostile to Michigan. The other thing is that you can recognize that AIPAC is a powerful organization that has a significant impact on American foreign policy without making it suggesting that it is responsible for all of the ills in the world and all of the ills in American foreign policy. Like, America does a lot of really terrible things in the world that AIPAC has nothing to do with and that Israel has nothing to do with. And I think that should be obvious, but it's also just important to say that, because I sometimes do hear people on the right and the left talking in ways in which there's a conspiracy theory in which AIPAC is at the center of, or Israel is at the center of absolutely everything. And I think that's firstly just factually inaccurate. And also it does play into certain notions of kind of Jews as these shadowy figures who control everything behind the scenes. And you can criticize AIPAC passionately without going in that direction.
And that plays into the trope of Jewish people controlling everything. But the fact that AIPAC has come so strongly against anyone who wants to talk about, say, for instance, the conversation about political funding has really turned people away from some of the good work that AIPAC has done in the past.
It's interesting. It's like listening to you talk, I'm thinking about how maybe a reframing is that the problem with AIPAC isn't the A and the I necessarily. It's the P and the A and the C and the super PAC. You know, it's like that's like where you want the focus to be.
Yes, and it's important to think of AIPAC not only as an organization, a Jewish organization, but an organization that has class interests, because it's basically controlled by billionaires. And so and you notice in some of these races, when AIPAC goes in against a candidate, the crypto people also go in, right? And various different other corporates. Why? Because they have class interests that are similar, whether they're Jewish, Christian, whatever, right? And it's partly because they want to defeat left candidates. They want to defeat progressive candidates because they know those candidates would not only challenge the U.S.-Israel relationship, they would also challenge politics on a whole range of other issues that would be uncomfortable for basically American oligarchs.
Regardless of what people mean when they use the word AIPAC or criticize Israel, I do feel like pro-Israel Democrats are having this moment of feeling a lot of pressure. Like, one member of the Democratic Majority for Israel told Politico that if Abdullah Sayed wins in Michigan today, it means that my community is going to have to reassess how we're approaching this battle, reassess our role in the party itself. And I'm not sure what that comment means. Do you think it means an exodus of Jewish people from the Democratic Party?
That's a great question. And this reminds me of this interview I saw Jon Stewart and Fetterman. How is it that Fetterman is not understanding that if his only criteria is what a candidate thinks about Israel, then that really delegitimizes a lot of things that John Fetterman has been saying.
For you could agree with them 90%, but Israel is the red line.
Absolutely. Israel for me. Like, I can't ever turn my back to Israel after where it's at.
My point is, if you don't disagree with them on a lot of things, why not use some of that energy? And even like Mamdani in New York is DSA, but there are things in the DSA platform that he disagrees with. And I'm assuming there's probably things in the Democratic platform that you might disagree with, but you don't disavow the entire thing. You're literally saying we can all have discussions, except when it comes to Israel, which is not America. It seems like a weird line to draw.
Well, so then, I don't think that's weird. I think what history demonstrates is that when people or a government or people turn their back to the Jewish community, things end really badly, and it's a dangerous.
Jewish community and Israel are not the same thing, brother man. They're not. That is not the same thing.
No. It's like, hey, it's like if I have to pick a side for after 10/7 and after Iran, I'm always going to stand with Israel.
No. American Jews have a series of commitments to issues like abortion rights, LGBT rights, concerns about climate change that just put them basically completely at odds. Donald Trump's popularity among American Jews is like 20%, right? So I think it's important to remember that what I am worried about is not an exodus of American Jews from the Democratic Party. What the real issue is an exodus of some very large American Jewish donors from the Democratic Party. And
so a draining of resources.
A draining of resources. Now, again, if the Democratic Party pursues a candidate in which they nominate charismatic candidates with a populist message that resonates, they may be able to replace that money with small donors, which is a much healthier system. But my fear is that what groups like AIPAC will do is they will say, well, the Democratic Party is now the party that represents a threat to the U.S.-Israel relationship. So let's double down on our support for the Republican Party, right? And when you're doubling down on your support for Trump's Republican Party, you're basically investing in American authoritarianism.
Yeah, just this week, you wrote about how you think if El-Sayed wins the race in Michigan and becomes the candidate for Senate from the Democratic Party, AIPAC is going to throw its support behind Mike Rogers, the Republican in the race, which when I first read it really surprised me. But I think it's worth articulating why you think that's a given.
And he was not wrong, because post the primaries, the statement that AIPAC gave was exactly that. And I feel like my biggest concern then was that, again, moving forward, this kind of, I would think, encourages the Democratic candidates to kind of think about defecting if they can't actively and effectively speak about their position on the genocide and how they look at, say, funding and support of Israel.
Because AIPAC has one criteria for how it decides which politicians it wants to support. Do you support unconditional U.S. support of Israel? And so obviously Mike Rogers is a much better candidate on that criteria than Abdul Sayed is. Haley Stevens, Sayed's opponent, was fine. But once she's out of the race, Rogers is a much better bet. And so we just kind of take this for granted in the way that that a group like AIPAC operates. But what I was trying to say in that video for my newsletter is, like, guys, what are we doing here? Right? Because this is not, we're not talking about 2012 here, 2008, where you're supporting John McCain or supporting Mitt Romney. Put aside what you think about Israel-Palestine. The Republican Party today represents an existential threat to the survival of American liberal democracy. Donald Trump is not, I'm sure you've done 100 podcasts about this. Is he not subtle about it, right? And to me, it's just insane that an American Jewish organization would prioritize U.S. support for Israel over the continued existence of American liberal democracy. American Jews have benefited. We have benefited a heck of a lot from America being a liberal democratic society. And that should be our top priority, is maintaining the existence of America as a liberal democracy. But it's not for an organization like AIPAC.
This guy is such a treasure for the Jewish voice in our mainstream media and the discourse. And I really wish that he would get the kind of support from more progressive, thoughtful Jewish community, business leaders, tech leaders, because this is the kind of conversation we need to respectfully have. And that is the only chance we have to move further, the needle further on this.
I think the thing that upsets some people who are like observing what's going on right now is that they look at what's happening in the Michigan Senate race or other races that have talked about AIPAC, and they see a version of what Donald Trump has done with politics, I think, which is he activated anger. In his case, anger at immigrants, to say, like, this is a problem. These people are a problem. Got people riled up, got them to vote for him. It was very effective and incredibly toxic in how it played out. I think when I see people arguing about AIPAC, I also see them activating anger. And I think, like you said, they could be activating anger towards money in politics, billionaires, what they could be activating anger in that way, but they also very well could be activating anger towards Jews.
Yeah.
That's what I think concerns some people.
Agreed.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anger per se in politics is not a bad thing, right? If you are angry at a genocide in Gaza, if you're angry at the fact that Americans go bankrupt because their healthcare is so expensive, as they watch their relatives die, they're basically on the phone for like 7 hours with these people, these bureaucrats trying to get some healthcare coverage. Like, you should be angry.
You should be angry about that. Yeah.
The question, it seems to me, is it a kind of anger that centers the dignity and rights and equality of all people, right? Yeah. Or is it an anger that dehumanizes people? Donald Trump's anger dehumanizes people. It dehumanizes immigrants and Muslims and trans people, people from Somalia, et cetera. And I think so. This is why it's really, really important not to make a clear distinction that AIPAC is part of a corrupt political system that needs to be changed. And AIPAC is pursuing supports policies that are fundamentally inhumane. And that doesn't have anything to do with your view about Jews and the right of Jews as citizens to be part of the political process. Part of the problem that I think the reason we're in this situation is that American Jewish organizations have basically said that to be Jewish means you are a supporter of Israel. And that linkage is, first of all, simply not true, right? The polling shows that among young American Jews in particular, literally almost a majority now support the idea of an equal binational state, not a Jewish state. So it's factually incorrect, but it's also dangerous. It would make as little sense as saying that to be Muslim American means you're a supporter of Saudi Arabia or Iran, or Chinese American means you're a supporter of the Chinese government, right? These are fundamentally different things. And I think everyone has a role in making sure we keep these things separate, right? Your idea about American Jews is one thing. Your idea about Israel is a separate thing. And you can criticize American Jews or American Christians, because Christians United for Israel is a Christian organization that's a big pro-Israel organization. You can criticize those organizations without being critical of Jews.
Peter, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
I always enjoy it.
So one thing that he mentioned about Muslims would automatically support Saudi Arabia. And honestly, I am livid that Trump just offered a nuclear deal to the Saudis. We cannot possibly continue to support the Saudis, knowing how abysmal their human rights record are and how there are almost insidious ways they have not just impacted some of the conversations between Iran and its neighbors, but they have consistently interfered in Yemen and Lebanon. So I'm really glad that he mentioned that. I would love for you to share any feedback. I try to do more videos, especially from my perspective as well, because I think this is a conversation that we need to develop together. Try to follow me if you can, subscribe, because the conversation does not stop here.